Trump is claiming that he has beaten COVID, and yet his staff are still falling ill with this. And doctors are still contradicting him. Repeating the headline in the I newspaper that he is not out of the woods yet. That seems to be quite a kind of telling, opportunistic phrase. They should be giving exact details of the condition he is in, rather than talking about that they won't say anything like that about Derek Draper or Mike Rosen. So why are they talking about he's not being out of the woods yet? Either he's ill or he's well. There cannot be in between, out of the woods. I mean, there is no record published by any of the papers, including the I newspaper, which suggests that anybody else out of the millions who have been affected and been exposed to the virus has been described in that way. So why are they making this false statement about Trump's own falsehood? He's not out of the woods yet. I mean, that suggests that he's almost not ill, or he's ill. Well, which one is it? Now, there is a long overdue piece, not that the contents are in keeping with the need for the telling of the truth by this Priti Patel. Priti Patel is nastier than Suella Braverman in her mental servitude to racism, racist kind of reactionary, racist intolerance and far-right propensities. And as I have said yesterday, Suella Braverman was condemned by Nick Cohen in The Observer a few weeks ago for her dishonesty and her unfitness and her kind of over-exaggerated legal kind of abilities and skills and knowledge and role. Priti Patel is much nastier than Suella Braverman, because Braverman has been caught lying and inflating her achievements and all the rest of it. But Priti Patel is a nasty piece of work because she is engaged in carrying out some of the most illegal, corrupt, criminal violations of basic human rights that any occupant in any post, including Theresa May, who was the person that was blamed for issuing the anti-Jamaican and anti-Windrush people directive and anti-immigrant directives, other ones, including saying that life for the refugee or asylum seeker or immigrant or migrant in the UK should be made uncomfortable by the UK creating a hostile environment. So Priti Patel is even nastier than Theresa May. That is how bad she is in her abuse of the position that she has been given. Now this is, and there is another mental slave there. That is June Sarpong. I mean, June Sarpong is unbelievably mentally servile. So I'll come to June Sarpong in a minute. So this piece by the deputy political editor of the I newspaper is talking about the employment tribunal and saying that Patel could give evidence at tribunal of her bullying claims. Priti Patel may be called to give evidence at an employment tribunal over claims that she forced out the most senior civil servant at the Home Office. The Home Secretary has been accused of bullying staff and allowing a press briefing campaign against Sir Philip Ratnam, who resigned as the department's permanent secretary in February. Sir Philip is bringing a claim for constructive dismissal against the Home Office. He has named Ms. Patel personally as a respondent, according to reports, which raises the prospect of her being called as a witness when the case is heard at a tribunal next September. So it's a year from now. I mean, a lot can change in a year. And she may lose. Priti Patel by that time, that is September next year, may no longer be in government. There may not be a government which will accept her as a member of the cabinet. It is possible. I'm not saying it will happen, but it is quite possible. And the rest of the story, I can predict, is not any more credible. And it's mainly based on the relationship between Philip Ratnam and Priti Patel. And I got a complimentary, flattering photograph of Priti Patel, who is pictured smiling, but she's smiling smugly. Now, moving on to her kind of like, which is June Sarpang. June Sarpang, the one that is in the picture there, was given extraordinary publicity by the BBC and others during the time that Tony Blair was Prime Minister. And her main claim, entitlement to that kind of platform, is the fact that she is a mental slave. And today's piece in the iNewspaper is saying that she is saying that the BBC's survival depends on its diversity, says Sarpong. And what she is saying in the first starting thing there is that the white working class are not being recognized for respect and recognition by the BBC. Now, that's a very easy thing for them to say and for her to say, because that is easily communicated as a concept. But the truth is, it's not the white working class that need to be given recognition by the BBC. It's all the people in society that the BBC has been lying to and lying about and misrepresenting. And it's not diversity. It's the authenticity and the truthfulness of the matter, of the message that the BBC should be addressing and practicing telling the truth. The BBC is not in place as a substitute for the local social services. The job that the BBC must do, and it doesn't do, is to tell the truth about everything, including the disasters that the local councils are. If that were the case, if the BBC were telling the truth about all these councils and all the government departments and all the authorities, including the police, then every aspect of society would be much better in terms of preparation, in terms of accountability, in terms of their delivery of their duties to the particular communities that they are in place to serve, and they are not serving. The June Sarpang is one of the mental slaves, as I said, that the racists in the media in Fleet Street kind of absolutely love, because that gives them a diversity display. Because Sarpang is very black skinned. So when she is there in the picture, you cannot mistake her for anything other than black, and that equals diversity. And that completely conceals the lack of veracity in that diversity display. She is not, when she actually speaks or appears, she is not representing the majority of the people who are denied the platform, denied the truth, and denied the say. And the majority overwhelmingly are African people, Asian people, and in the contemporary context of the last 30 years, Muslim people. Because the Muslims are not the targets in the way that they have been in the last 30 years. Before, there had been anti-Muslim prejudices always, but not as blatantly, as brazenly as they have been since the launch of the anti-Muslim crusade by the Muslim named Shaidan Rushdie. And we go back to the Boris Graph, which has had a Bengali anti-Muslim criminal linked to it called Amit Roy. Amit Roy is a diminutive, is even shorter than John Biggs. Now, Amit Roy is a diminutive courier of the racist message against Muslims. And his service to the Daily Telegraph goes back decades. And Amit Roy was one of the attackers of Muslims even before the organized launching of Shaitan Rushdie occurred. So these people who are serving the racists like Jun Sarpang and Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, and of course the longest serving servile racist mental slave Trevor Terrible P-Lips. These are only a few of the names that can be mentioned. The other names include Harman Woosley. Harman, the completely, absolutely brainwashed mental slave, Woosley, was installed at various locations, various excuses. And I actually, in good faith, I actually helped him get the job at the ILEA. I didn't intend him to get the job, but the racists misread my analysis and they appointed the first mental slave they could find to answer my criticism. I had said that the Inner London Education Authority was a racist organization which needed to reverse its racist policies by appointing anti-racist person as the chief education officer, preferably a black person. I never, ever would have thought, let alone recommended, Harman, the mental slave Woosley, because he doesn't have the intellectual capacity, nor has the moral kind of depth needed to oppose racism. Woosley was the racist choice, in addition to the racist choosing Trevor Terrible P-Lips. But Trevor Terrible P-Lips has been given a wider platform than the racist second choice, Harman Woosley. And Woosley has had more publicly paid positions than any other, including Terrible P-Lips. Terrible P-Lips has had jobs through the media and the Quangocracy, and he was used to destroy the anti-racist legislation, even though it was very limited, and he was used to destroy the Commission for Racist and Enslavement, that I called it, the CRE, by Harriet Hattie Harman, who is one of the two women that have endorsed Trevor Terrible P-Lips with lunatic loyalty to him. One is Harriet Harman, and the other is Polly Toynbee of The Guardian. Now, Polly Toynbee has had a role, in addition to being the Guardian columnist, She has had a role as a kind of intelligent women that have got a platform. And she played a key role in attacking Gordon Brown and the Labour Party and helping the Tories win the 2010 votes, whatever number of votes they did, because they obviously didn't win enough votes to not have to have a collision with the lying, sick, clegg-fronted Lib Dems. But she actually supported David Cameron and condemned Gordon Brown's side. So she's a right-winger, and Trevor Terrible Phillips is a right-winger, as is June Sarpong, as is Harman Woosley, as is every single other mental slave recruited by the media or the local bureaucracies that have been given platforms in the last few decades. And it is these criminals, the mental slaves that is, with their master and mistress criminals, endorsing and appointing them, that are to be blamed for the highest persistent rise in criminality among African origin young people in this country. And a large number of the black skin, that is African, Caribbean backgrounded appointees in the schools bureaucracies have been complicit with the criminality agenda. And most of these self-serving, quote, educationists have been the opposite of educationists. These have been liars who have been grabbing the posts and positions as school teachers, senior teachers, head teachers, whatever they could grab, simply for the sake of it, not for any enlightened educational purpose. And the records of the likes of Woosley, Terrible Phillips, and June Sarpong, and their less known, less publicly known likes and comparisons, installed in positions in colleges, universities, and schools at various posts as teachers, heads of departments, or professor, lecturers, whatever, or head teachers. These criminals, with one or two exceptions, but those exceptions don't actually make up for the and compensate for the severe life-destroying damages that the criminals, the majority of the criminals in these posts, have been perpetrating and causing and perpetuating against the children, against the young people attending the schools and attending the colleges, universities. So that is the antithesis to the anti-racist kind of narrative. What is the justification? What is the justification for allowing the likes of June Sarpong and Suella Braverman and Priti Patel and Trevor Terrible Phillips and Harman, hateful Woosley, the useless? What is the justification for allowing these criminals exemption from anywhere near the rigorous scrutiny and denouncement and outrage that they deserve for the destruction of lives of so many African children, African young persons, and the corresponding numbers or ratios of the or proportions of the Asian ones? For every Terrible Phillips and every June Sarpong and every Harman Ousley, there must be, by sheer demographic comparisons, at least 10 likes from Asian backgrounds, from India, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh, and other parts. So these criminals are pursuing careers, enriching themselves in terms of money and parks and whatever, but they're betraying the cause, the rights and the needs of the majority of the absolute majority of the young people and the generations of other aged groups in those communities. And there is absolutely no justification. There is no moral justification, there is no evidential justification for these criminals to be allowed exemption from liability for their corrupt, criminal, proactive violations of the rights of the African Asian children and young persons and the Asian children and young persons. I mean, again, just as my analysis and narrative and the denunciation of the particular status quo of racist disequilibrium and disparity in the case of the Inner London Education Authority in the early 1980s was misinterpreted by the racists who rushed to appoint this criminal, Harman Ousley, to the post that I said needed to be filled by an anti-racist and preferably a black person. I never meant that anyone like Harman Ousley, who was completely unfit, unsuitable, and did not ever deserve to be given that post. Now, Ousley is a corrupt operator, so he must have had various links with some of the manipulating links within the ILEA, and they must have played some part. I cannot say for exact accuracy because I have not seen any written account of any of the goings on that took place leading to Ousley's appointment. But I know this for a fact that when I made the criticism as the group leader of the community elected representatives on the ILEA, one of the employees in the ILEA, which is a rare employee because none of the thousands of other employees of the ILEA who knew about me and my position as the community representative campaigner made that kind of contact. But one person contacted me and said that my comment was actually discussed by the inner echelon in the Inner London Education Authority. That was very short time before the crooks in the ILEA announced that they had appointed Ousley as the chief education officer. Now, Ousley has done serious damage to the cause of fighting racism in this country. And this criminal has been one of the numbers that the racists have rewarded with jobs and with positions. Now, similarly, when I criticized, not far apart in terms of time, like it was all happening in the early 1980s, I condemned the East End News. That was set up from a base in Tower Hamlets by a group of the National Union of Journalists because they were trying to carry out a kind of counter move within the bureaucracy of the National Union of Journalists. My continuous and continuing disagreements with the racists controlling that particular title, racists personified by the racist criminal Mike Johnson, meant that these criminals, instead of stopping the coverage, racist coverage, a racist editorial line on the Eastern news, they gave rise to an entirely black kind of fronted outfit, which is now known as The Voice. They started as a page, and then they allowed the lobbying to be done for the Barclays Bank, which was supporting apartheid at the time, to mainly fund that racist, pro-apartheid kind of thing. And this voice is still in being, and it is a right-wing, corrupt outfit. In the beginning, I had a few kind of published comments, about 10 or 20 comments. But then the criminals completely moved further to the right than they had been at the beginning. So they stopped publishing my stuff. And so what I'm saying here is that the media cannot be held to account for its racist orientation and role in denying. If the alternative so-called media, fronted by black-skinned operatives, is used to hide the racism of the white-controlled mainstream media, which is what is happening with The Voice. And before that, I had long-standing contribution made to the corrupt titles fronted by Riffraff. I call him Riffraff Ali because he was always lying, and he was carrying absolute rubbish in his papers called Caribbean Times and the Asian Times. And it was funded by the public through the corrupt Ken Lying Still Livingstone. Ken Lying Still Livingstone funded the crooked operations of Riffraff Ali's Hansib publications, as well as other lesser dominant criminals like the Indian Gujarati from East Africa who was publishing this so-called New Life. So all these collections of criminals were being funded by either the right-wing mainstream media or the so-called left-wing politicals like the likes of Ken Lying Still Livingstone in the case of Caribbean Times and the Asian Times and New Life and assorted other similar titles. When privatized crooks and racists claim that I had been publishing the Black Journal or the Black Parents Journal with the money from the GLC, they could not be more wrong. The GLC never paid anything like the fraction of the cost of one advertisement, you moron, Ian, piss off. I put in the main resource, as I'm putting in here, as I have been doing this since before the likes of Ian piss off left their mother's arms, the morons, racist idiots. I campaign with my own resource, my time, and my knowledge and my abilities. Nobody has funded anything. Everyone who has been associated with me owes me infinitely more than I can describe. I never got anything from them. What they contributed, I acknowledge that they contributed under severe pressure from me to make a contribution. But that contribution never, ever could equal 1% of the official cost of the particular project. So you get this, you lying, racist Ian piss off, a private lie. How could you even think that anyone would be able to fund a project that needs, if it is done in commercial way, literally hundreds of thousands of pounds of annual budget. Hundreds of thousands, which is the equivalent of what I contribute every single time, every single project, you morons. And you don't know about this personality of these people that you claimed had been funding my publications. As I said about the Level R crooks, the Level R crooks based in Brixton had a meeting, emergency meeting, and they claimed that I had not paid. Of course, I had not paid them bill for 2 or 3 print runs of the particular magazine. After they lied, after I caught them lying. So I did that as the nearest equivalent to a declaration by a court of law in my favor, because they lied, they broke the contract. One of the numbers, I caught her lying. So I organized for her to be spotted and investigated. And they completely misrepresented that, these morons, the racist Level R morons, overstating their importance in relation to me. So the Level R still owe me money because the damage they did by breaking their contract with me. You get that, you privatize, Ian, piss off. And the Level R criminals originally, when they started the Level R, had pretensions about being an alternative journal. They soon gave it up because they didn't have the intellectual abilities or the grasp or the knowledge that I have. So therefore, they couldn't match my challenges and my questions and my interrogations. So that actually contributed to their completely giving up. So when I'm doing this world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, I'm not doing it just by accident because there is no other phrase to use other than world exclusive. It is world exclusive because I have spent more time on the battleground creating newspapers and news organs and news platforms than anyone else alive who has done the same thing or anything similar. I have rejected offers to join various times, various governments in my country, because I believed, and I still believe, that becoming a member of a government would have meant that I would have to moderate my dedication and adherence to the truth, which is more important than me having a job as a minister or as a prime minister. I mean, whatever the logical conclusion would have been. And I still remain of the view that it is more important to tell the truth than to get a job in propaganda or in government or whatever. Get this one, Ian, lying piss off. And your private eye, I regularly subsidize it every issue. Not because I expect some overdue revelation, but I want to check the evidence, and that is part of the fact-checking evidence list of sources. You are not even telling the truth, 1% of the truth about the corruption and criminality and racism that go on in this society, you morons. And you are opportunistic and you are corrupt because you have been made a millionaire by the BBC giving you money under false pretext so that you would not devote anything like the kind of hostility the Daily Mail and the Sun have devoted to attacking the BBC. So there's a corrupt arrangement that suits you and the BBC, and has done for decades, since you were installed wrongly in that post by Richard Ingrams. Ingrams has made a serious, terrible mistake by appointing Hislop in that position. When I say terrible mistake, I mean in the context of the UK press and the media being totally corrupt and racist, and being in urgent need of being replaced by a non-racist, investigative, truth-telling, overall mainstream media. As a satirical venture started in the 60s, Private Eye had a promise to make an influential decision every issue, exposing something very wrong in a very big way that was going on in this country. And it stopped. And with Hislop in that post, it has completely stopped. There is nothing. And it hasn't affected the destruction of the UK's pretense to democracy, which Brexit means that the destruction of that pretense. There is nothing. And Private Eye, or an investigative satirical magazine, which it was promising to be in the late 60s and early 70s, almost after the end of the 70s, it ceased. It stopped being so after Ingrams foisted this absolute embarrassment on that post. This is not my word, it's Oberon Waugh who condemned Ingrams for this positioning of Ian Pissoff in that post. And Waugh and others who criticize Ingrams for that have been vindicated every time. Private Eye is a private lie now. It doesn't provoke any controversy. It doesn't get any libel suit. Now, that is the whole point. It should have been open to being sued for libel every single issue. Because being sued for libel creates a bigger impact about the issues under reference than it does if there is no suit. Now, what kind of idiot cannot understand this? The idiot like Ian Pissoff, because he doesn't want an end to the corruption and criminality. He is cozily enjoying it. So this is the world diagnosis, exclusive diagnosis of the media in Fleet Street. And we shall be doing this continuously, as we shall be talking about the London Borough of Newham, for example, and taking an updated look at Lindsay Jones. Is it Lindsay Jones? Who is the so-called editor of the Newham Recorder and the East London Idiotizer. I mean, Lindsay Jones' record shows that she has been a journalist, or she has been in the journalism trade going back to since 1980s. And it seems that she has left whatever brains she had in the 1980s. There is no brains left. And why I am saying that about Lindsay Jones, I shall have to give chapter and verse examples to justify that labeling. So when I say that world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, it includes world exclusive diagnosis of the Newham Recorder, of the East London Idiotizer, and the other outlets, including what used to be called the UK Press Gazette, where I wrote a number of articles and pieces in the 70s and 80s. And when I stopped doing that, because it became even less relevant than it was previously when I started. I must say that I never wrote for money, and they never offered me money, and it would make no difference whatsoever. Even if they offered me money, which they never did, I would not have changed my stance or my findings or my observations. And when I say that I write and I wrote, I mean that. I don't do that for money. And nobody has made any offer of paying me any money. And I don't depend on that offer for my writing, for my thinking, for my analysis. It is bigger than any money or any kind of platform or career. As I said, I have rejected more offers for joining government or joining some other operation, business, or ministry than I can list. And the reason has been always I had to consider whether taking on these kind of offers would compromise my telling the truth. And it has always been my finding, my conclusion, that I would have been compromised by any such jobs or offers. Because whatever the excuses that could be created around justifying, moderating, and lowering my standards, the fact would be most acutely known to me, if not anyone else, that I was lowering and tempering my high standard of ethics and morality. And that was a price I was not going to pay. And that is the actual evidence and the basis on which I think that the British media needs a scrutiny like I am making available, so that its duties, job to tell the truth is established, and democracy is also helped to be established locally, regionally, and centrally in the whole country, as well as internationally. And all of that is backed by my adherence to objectively neutral international standards of morality, ethics, accountability, and solidarity, and universality of equality against disparity and inequality. Does the current health editor at The Guardian, the racist liar Sarah Bosley, have any idea about any of these concepts? I don't think so. When she was not the health editor but something else on The Guardian, she spoke to me on the telephone sometime either late February or early March 1992. And she was interested to find out about my work and my background. And the reason because they were the mainstream media, the racists, thought that I was engaged in creating a revolution. Every time I do some campaign, they think I'm doing a revolution. I don't know how they can justify that kind of sick hostility, because I never go out of the framework of international law or the framework of internationally sustainable domestic law. And most certainly, I don't do anything immoral on purpose, let alone condone anything immoral. So when I was doing that campaign in 1992 for the parents and the parent governors and the children of the Stratford School, I was doing that for these same values that I have been always adhering to, and against the local council, against the UK central government. That has been my general kind of adversaries list: local council, central government, if there is a regional kind of in between, then that too as well. Because when I was an active member of the schools committee, which I've mentioned before, as the most powerful and influential committee of all the committees in the Inner London Education Authority, I sat on the one hand in terms of narrative, in terms of scholarship, in terms of knowledge, and the rest of the committees members sat on the other, because always I was catching them out. And I was not catching them out as a joke, as a game, but all on duty, because I had to find out if they knew the necessary amount that they needed to know as members of the schools committee, so that they would be making the right decision, correct decisions, appropriate decisions, which the children were entitled to be benefited by, and their parents were entitled to be benefiting by, their guardians, if some children were unfortunately in the position of not having parents, but being looked after, represented by guardians. Many of the children were abused by both their parents and their guardians and whoever, and the schools. And there was no culture in the Inner London Education Authority at that time, which is one, I got elected to represent the communities in October. This is October 1982. And I stayed there until the ILEA was scrapped. So whenever the actual date was. So it was several years. And in those years, I had to then train the entirety of the ILEA's membership and educate them on almost every aspect of their duties. Well, it's not something uniquely done just to the ILEA. That is what I do. I have been a teacher most of my times, then I have been a non-teacher, if you like. So this is again something I do, not in return for money. So Ian, piss off. Take this into account, you moron. I have been teaching more people at more levels than any known academic anywhere, any known university or institution, you morons. And everything I have taught has been vindicated. Every lesson I've given has been vindicated. Every analysis I have made has been vindicated. And that's the beauty and the power of the truth, because truth is uncontaminated. So therefore the truth emerges. Sooner or later, the truth triumphs. That is a lesson, and that is the resource that keeps the tellers of the truth in dynamic modes. And the world needs that. Society needs that. Look at today's papers. Look at the lies they're telling. What is the Times saying? Now they're saying that malfunctioning phones are to blame for the efforts to trace 40,000 contracts. And there is a reluctant kind of, in the headline, there is a subtle, reluctant kind of admission of the truth in the Times. They say about the liar, Trump, leaving hospital, still battling the virus. That is the reluctant bit of the truth. That is absolutely in one rare headline in all of the papers in Fleet Street. That is the one that sums up the liar. He leaves hospital while still battling virus. That is absolutely correct. But this is not correct, because this is not going to happen. This is Boris Johnson lying, Brexit style. And they're saying that the Conservative conference is also reduced to shambles as the Tory is hit by tech glitches. Now, quite apart from the tech glitches, let's examine the actual reason. The actual reason is that the Conservatives are now increasingly hostile to Boris Johnson's various extra kind of lawlessness and law breaking and unfitness. So they're looking for an excuse, and these technical glitches neatly serves their purpose. They can say, well, we can't have a conference really because we've got too many problems with technical gadgetry and communications. So Boris Johnson, the truth about Boris Johnson, the liar, has now begun to be a real liability, which it was bound to be. It was bound to become the liability for the Conservatives sooner or later. How could a liar carry on? So that's what is happening in the Conservative Party. He has got too many far-fetched, stupid, racist, damaging kind of pieces of rubbish guys under the disguise of legislation. And most Tories, for their own careers and own kind of local interests and business interests, find that they cannot support this. And their numbers is the problem. Because there are too many of them increasingly catching Boris Johnson the liar out. Well, they were idiots for a start to choose him over any of the others. Not that the entire list of the hopefuls was acceptable in any way, objectively speaking, but what they had, many of them had less kind of risk as liars and dysfunctional personalities than Johnson. Now, Johnson's kind of life is being laid bare by Tom Bauer in the way that Bauer does. Not that he tells the truth, but Bauer does a topically good job every time he publishes something like this. So topically, Johnson is exposed as completely, absolutely unfit for various reasons, not least of which is the confession about his sexual relationship with Jennifer Arcuri. Because Bauer is the first one to report that he said his last kind of communication to her, according to Bauer, not that that is the truth, but according to Bauer, the last communication to Jennifer Arcuri said that he, Johnson, misses her, needs her, loves her. And Bauer says that Arcuri was both his lover and a mother figure. Now we shall have to experiment and explore that particular description further in due course. But the point of it all is that Boris Johnson is not fit for this society. Now that statement actually raises the questions: why am I saying this, and why aren't the newspapers altogether saying this? Why isn't the Labour Party in opposition in Parliament saying this? They're tinkering, they're tickling, but they're not saying anything like what I am saying. And what I am saying is based on the collected, complete evidence of his dysfunction and his dishonesty and his unfitness to be in that post at the expense of the people who are being let down, betrayed, and whose lives are being destroyed. So there is this threat by the Wales people, the second newspaper to say this. Wales, Wales threatened to quarantine risky. Wales threatened to quarantine risky UK visitors. So that's a bit of a difficult kind of headline. Too many words with the verb in there. And the details of the stories in the Times are details about the corrupt agenda of the business interests. And the business interests are the ones that are pushing and pulling the various kind of levers behind the Boris Johnson fronted cabal. But more interesting than all of that is this headline, which is absolutely another rare piece, but it is totally worth discussing a bit. As a British judge has been criticized for accepting Hong Kong role. Now let's see what it says. One of Britain's most senior judges has been accused of adding legitimacy to China's crackdown on freedom in Hong Kong by accepting a position on the former colony's highest court. Lord Hodge, Deputy President of the Supreme Court, was appointed yesterday to the Court of Final Appeal in Hong Kong after the departure of an Australian judge amid concerns over China's national security law. Now, this guy is a Supreme Court judge who has just been bribed by the Chinese. That is effectively what is happening here. If that is the case, then the case is made that the judges are crooks, open to being bought. As I have said many times about David Neuberger, who was the first president of the quote Supreme Court as formed, who got bought by the propaganda machine of the Brexiteers. As I said, under the guidance of David Lidington, the Cambridge tagged liar who was deemed as the deputy to Theresa May de facto. And Lidington, although claimed to be an opponent of Brexit, soon succumbed to the charms and the bribes and started singing uncontrollably endless excuses in praise of Brexit. And in that capacity, he recruited the services of David Neuberger. At that stage, about to be leaving the post as the president of the Supreme Court. And Neuberger said that London would become the beneficiary of Brexit because the world's legal trade would come to London. Remember, that is the concept, legal trade. So law in this country is not a constitutional right to the citizen or the ordinary person. Law is a business above everything else. And that is how the president of the Supreme Court saw it. So this deputy Supreme Court judge selling himself and his soul to the Chinese kind of money is not a surprise. Because apart from this judge, David Cameron has been bought by the Chinese as well. Huge sums of money. Just like Boris Johnson has been paid millions by Boris Kraft for no citable reason, justifying that. Because Boris Johnson is not somebody who has written anything of substance on anything. He has a pretense, he has a cover, he has a facade, including the most tellingly stupid facade that he is a Latin speaker. As I have said, Latin is another language, for heaven's sake. So if he lies in English, he lies in Latin. What's the difference? So the Chinese have been buying David Cameron. Now they bought a judge. What is surprising? The Chinese have got a stake in the HS2 as well and other big projects. And they must have bought George Osborne while he was in post with Cameron. And as Napoleon said, this is a nation of shopkeepers. But Napoleon isn't around 200 years. I mean, this is a nation of soul sellers. I mean, all these post holders have been behaving dishonestly. For example, Cameron said that he would not increase the size of the House of Lords, House of Peers. And what he did, he increased the size of it with shameless disregard for any relevance, any quality or any abilities on the part of the morons he appointed. And the same thing is true of Boris Johnson. All of these corruption and corrupt behavior and lying and racism raise the question, where is the party, Democratic Party, that will put an end to all of this and liberate this country from this corruption and the culture of crooked, corrupt, bribery and racism and dysfunction and cruelty? That is why the Labour Party was established. What is the Labour Party doing? Is it delivering the alternative? That is the question, which is part of this quest that we shall be continuing in the next editions of this world exclusive diagnosis of the media, coming to you from the East End of London in the quote UK. Notice when we write this UK, we put a quotation mark around the UK. Why do we do that? Because UK is being broken up by Boris Johnson and other racist cabal. The next destination would be the departure of the Scots under the pressure of the racist, Englishistic Little Englanders, currently still fronted by the liar Boris Johnson.